It's a beautiful day. Let's continue our discussion on the afterlife. Today, I wanted to go into, we started doing this last week, and I wanted to spend a little more time this week focused on the idea of ego and transcendence. So we started talking last week about recognizing the conflict, the duality that exists within the human heart. The Talmudic sages named what they saw as two competing forces. That within the heart, there were two competing forces. This is in the Talmud and Brachot, the Yetzer Tov, the good inclination, and the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. Now, according to the sages, these are the Talmudic sages, the model, the human psyche has a noble and good inclination with a proclivity towards performing positive, performing life-affirming actions. And this inclination is driven towards transcendence. At the same time, a person has an ego-driven inclination, a force that desires and craves survival on the level of the physical. This inclination is fixated on the preservation and the protection of the ego. So what it's focused on, and it's important because often we have this idea of good and bad, positive, evil, these words which they're dualities, but they don't actually mean anything in the practical day-to-day. Within us, this is on a basic, fundamental Jewish philosophical level, that we have one part of our heart that has an inclination towards transcendence, and another part of our heart that has an inclination towards ego. So we're talking here about ego versus transcendence. So to simplify it, we can say that the Yetzer Tov, the good inclination, is the inner-oriented inclination, and the Yetzer Hara is the outer-oriented inclination. We spoke about this a bit last week. So, and what's amazing about that is each one has a particular perception of self. The good inclination, the Yetzer Tov, is selfless, it's altruistic, it's other-oriented, and the ego-centered Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, as we call it, which is so poorly translated, but the Yetzer Hara is self-centered, and it just seeks to satisfy its own appetites. Good? Clear? Now, Yetzer, just going into the etymology of the word Yetzer, Yetzer is from the Hebrew root word yatzar. Yatzar means to form or to construct. So we are a being who is in a constant state of becoming, constantly shaped and influenced by the choices that we make, intellectually, emotionally, actively. The choice of whether we approach life from a transcendent, ego-centered gestalt is entirely in our own hands. So because of that, because we truly have this choice of how to choose which of the Yetzers, which of the constructs of our lives we're going to narrate our life based on, our Yetzer, or our own Yatzar, meaning we are in no small part responsible for the being that we have become. We are the co-creators in partnership with the Creator to form and function our life. It's so easy to blame things on others. It's so easy to blame things on nature, on nurture. But the end of the day is when you're 16 years old, you can do that. But when you're 56, you can't do that anymore. You've already had 40 years of being the master of your own actions. And so if an individual, and I'm not saying anyone in this room, but if an individual is still doing that, then that is a really great opportunity to look within and say, why am I narrating my life based on someone else? That's not my life. Really? I mean, I can go Freudian for only so long. My life is whatever I make of it. And all of the choices that I didn't make were also choices that I did make because I made them passively. So let's take a look at the beginning. Genesis, Bereshit. As the Creator is creating the universe, it says something fascinating there. It says, God observed creation, and behold, it was very good. That's a funny thing. Think about that. And God makes the sun and the moon and the stars, and behold, it's very good. And God makes the sea and the trees and the plants and the mosquitoes. Oh, and behold, it's very good. Mosquitoes aren't in the Torah, by the way. But I mean, they are, but not specifically. Even though, interestingly enough, because I said mosquitoes, I'll tell you that the Talmud talks about mosquitoes and says that when someone says they're great, you should tell them, afilu yitosh kadmenu, even a mosquito was created before you. And the reason why the Talmud says that it uses the mosquito is because a mosquito, as far as the Talmud knows, maybe today we know more, is the only substance that takes from the universe, that takes from the ecosystem, but doesn't give back. The truth is, we don't know that as a fact because there was a time in the 70s that they had a way to get rid of all the mosquitoes, and they didn't, because we're not exactly sure what the mosquitoes do yet. We don't want to take them out of the ecosystem, even though the Talmud uses them as an example, as that which takes but doesn't give back. So when someone says they're so great, you should say, afilu yitosh kadmenu, even a mosquito was created before you. Yeah.
Somebody eats them. The frogs eat them.
Yeah, no, exactly.
The lizards eat them. So they're food for somebody.
Yeah. And they're and we're food for them.
Full circle.
Yeah, perhaps you're right. So according to the ancient rabbis of the Medrash, the words very good refer to the evil inclination. Because if, as it says in the Medrash, were it not for the Yetzer, were it not for the evil inclination, nothing would compel us to build a home, enter a relationship, have children, or do business. The ego gives the human being certain essential powers and drives that are necessary for survival, that are necessary for self-preservation. So here we can see that the ego-based inclination is not purely negative. Actually, it's quite important. It's valuable because it guarantees physical security and survival. So I think that it's quite normal and adaptive to be self-centered up to a certain point. You had a question? Oh, okay. According to the rabbi's comment concerning the necessity of the evil inclination, self-centeredness itself can be the initial incentive to participate or partake in any number of physical activities, even ones that have positive repercussions beyond the initial satisfaction, like raising children. I think creativity is a good example. The ego's involvement in the initial stages of the process of creativity. The greatest artists, the greatest creators, they need that ego. Yet this kind of ego drive can only get the person to the drawing board. It can't get them further. The artist may share that their method of painting. I remember an artist once told me that he said, what first gets me going in the morning gets me into the studio. And that's my ego. The ego tells him that today you're going to make a wonderful painting. But slowly, as the artist sits in front of the canvas, they realize that the ego in itself is unable to paint. It can get the artist into the studio. It can get the artist in front of the easel. But to put the brush in the hands and to actually create the work of art, the ego can't do that. So while the ego attempts to paint, the critic within keeps on telling his ego that the paint is going nowhere. And finally, when the ego is completely humbled into submission and collapses, the small voice within surfaces and then inspires him to paint. So the ultimate objective is not to completely surrender and relinquish the ego. It's to include and embrace it within a more transcendent and noble context. It's to render it less opaque and make it more transparent to the light of the soul. And through this process, we're attempting to harmoniously integrate the surface self with the deeper self, so that the external state expresses the inner reality. The Ra, like Yetzer Hara, the Ra, the negativity of the inclination of the Yetzer, needs to be purged and uprooted. But the actual drive and vitality itself needs to be harnessed and utilized towards a positive and constructive purpose. Without the Yetzer, without the I of self, including the positive ambition, the passion, and the general drive of life, we'd come to a standstill. The Yetzer, the urge, is the yeast in the dough. It makes us rise beyond our current state, ensuring that we strive to reach or even exceed our dormant potential. What do you think?
That, as usual in Kabbalah, it's about finding the balance.
Yes.
So your original drive, but it's your soul that is at the steering wheel. So it's about finding the balance between a useful ego and a destructful one.
So how do you think that looks in reality? It's very nice in theory, but how does it look in reality?
It's such an interesting, idea, because I think for most of us, we want to present in the world who we are inside, who are you know, that that godly soul. And when it doesn't happen, I think, I know for me, then that ego, the animal soul, beats me up to not, you know, when I haven't succeeded. So that's how it can look for me. And so I have to be careful when I'm striving to be a certain way, to put that out there, and it doesn't happen, to not get sucked down that hole. So bringing on board that piece of me that's like, okay, didn't succeed that time, keep going, try again. Because I feel like that evil inclination can get you from all ends if you know, if you let it, I guess. So I think that's for me how it can look. So I don't know if that's exactly what you were talking about, but that's how I heard it.
And it's funny how it's really a duality, right? There's this dichotomy where you want it and you know it's right, but how do you integrate? How do you make it right for you?
I think that the Torah or the Halakha gives us some tools to do that.
Give me an example.
Or the charity we need to do, helping others, keeping some rules. These are all to remind us that we're part of an ecosystem, and that we're not greater than the rest. And so I would think that doing a few mitzvot, like prayer, is very strong from my perspective, in reminding us we're just part of this ecosystem, and our ego should not allow us to believe that we're any better than the next person.
Right. We've said this before here, but ego stands for edging God out.
Okay, true.
You were also saying that ego was, for the artist, was the kind of like the drive to get them into the studio. So it's also edging God in a certain way, because it's driving an artist to get up and get out there. So what I was thinking was, in terms of tangibles, it's like the day after you've been on holiday for a month or a week or something like that, and then you got to go back to work, and you get up in the morning and you go, I don't know how to do this job anymore. Can I actually remember what I'm supposed to be doing? And just like get up, because you have to get up and go. And that voice is telling you, you know, do I remember my passwords? Do I remember how to do this particular task or something like that? And you get in there and you surmount that hesitation, you know, that kind of, I don't know, that voice that talks to you about all the things that you might not be good at anymore, which is not true. It's just all this negative talk. So I don't know, that's the way I was hearing it, the way to surmount like our day-to-day struggles, where we kind of like talked ourselves out of things and ego drive ourselves into work. You know?
Definitely. And I think this is essentially what we're trying to say, is that it's a good thing. The ego is good, but we have to be careful with letting the ego drive everything. Letting the ego, it's great, right? It gets you up out of bed. It gives you that drive. There are very good elements to it, but then there are also elements of it that can be self-defeating. So that is why we have two different narratives within us. Essentially, I mean, I'm going a step further, but what it is the ego, which is more emotional based, is how we're going to be able to get the job done. But the transcendent nature, the Yetzer Tov, the good inclination, which is more intellectual based, is how we make decisions. So we should make decisions based on our transcendent nature, and then use our ego to act on those decisions instead of the other way around, which often happens. Let's not use our ego to make decisions, but rather use the transcendent nature to make decisions, and then use the ego, that selfish part of us, to act on those decisions. That would be, I'm getting ahead of myself, but that would be the idea behind it. There's a story in the Talmud that there was once a group of sages that converged, and they decided that it was time to permanently remove the Yetzer Hara, the ego, from the world. It says, moving heaven and earth, the request was granted. They finally had within their grasp the most elusive, the most powerful of all the animalistic desires and energies. They had the libido. After 3 days of life, everything seemed calmer. Yet the zest and the vitality of life was missing. So much so that they weren't able to find a freshly laid egg. Simply put, their life was now void of passion, and it was static. It was flat. It was dreadfully bland. Contemplating their predicament, they had no other choice but to allow the ego, the Yetzer Hara, to roam freely. I think the message of this story of the Talmud is that these so-called animalistic passions, these so-called animalistic desires, these drives, they're not negative. It's only when their energy is focused in the wrong direction that they become detrimental and spiritually and maybe even morally harmful. The libido drives the chicken or the hen to lay an egg. Without the ego, we'd have no eggs in the Talmudic tale. And there's so many other elements to life that we need the ego for. So we often, for some reason, I don't know why this happened, but for some reason, we look at the world through the lens of black and white. It's good or bad, but it's not necessarily true. And I say this so often because it keeps on coming up, and it keeps on being something that maybe we have to say every day. And that is that the beauty of emotional intelligence, of emotional maturity, is the ability to hold two truths at the same time. And they could be contrasting truths. Maybe that is the message of life, because within us, the ego and the transcendent nature are two truths that we are constantly holding at the same time.
Can you give an example of two truths at the same time, but they're conflicting?
Before I give an example, can anyone else give an example?
Oh, I can give you a practical example of it's only good. And it's in a practical, very practical life matter that happened to me on Monday. I changed my kitchen, I changed my sink, and I had found an handyman that was supposed to come to connect the sink. And then he doesn't show up on Monday morning. And then he tells me we'll come later. And then he decides he's not coming. So I'm at 1:30 on Monday, stuck with no sink since Saturday. And I had to, but that time I wasn't very happy. I had to call a proper plumber who came, charged me $977 for 2 hours of work. But he redid all my plumbing. And when he said, I have to redo all my plumbing, I said, what a blessing the handyman didn't come. Because had the handyman come, he would have just fixed it up. And the next time I would have turned on my dishwasher, I would have had a flood in the house. So I was actually happy. In the beginning, it felt like it wasn't good, that my ego was a bit unhappy because, it didn't go according to my plan, but it went perfect in the end. It cost me a little bit more, who cares? But it allows me to be safe in my home.
Yeah. So often, like your story, Alessandra, that the ego gets in the way.
Yeah, because in the beginning I was like, I'm not going to pay a plumber to just reconnect a sink. And then an actual plumber comes and he says, with this sink, your plumbing is kaput. That you need a whole new thing. But I was able, thanks to your teachings, to say, well, you know what? What a blessing the guy didn't come.
So that's the difference between choice and destiny. But the idea of holding two truths, Kelsey just said, I think, which knowing that your perspective and another person's perspective are both valid, even though they are opposite. It allows us to hold and respect each other. I think that's really what it is. Our lives have become so polarized. We live in an issue-based society. You're either this or you're that. And I don't have time to be able to listen to another person's perspective. I purposely look for other people's perspectives in my life because I'm okay. I know my perspective. I'm very confident with my perspective, but I don't know your perspective. So do I want to live in an echo chamber, or do I want to live in a place where I can grow and I could become better? I'll never forget this one student that I had at Concordia that many years later sent me, maybe 10 years later, sent me an email. The gist of the email was, she said that when she first met me, she thought I was crazy. But then over time, she realized that you only learn from people who are vastly different than you. And maybe from those people that are vastly different than you, we learn what to do, and from some we learn what not to do. But without allowing those perspectives to at least to play, to enjoy those perspectives, we end up being in this echo chamber. And I find that's how the polarization happens. If I had to go back in history, just people that are just building each other up, saying the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, but Rabbi, we've tried that with the clubhouse. Remember in the beginning?
Well,
We were in the Palestine.
Okay, well, Clubhouse wasn't a good example of it. But this room is a good example. I guarantee you, if we started going around this room, a lot of us have very different views on the same thing.
Sure.
Now, there's two ways that we can do it. Either we can choose in this room to focus on things that unite us instead of things that divide us, which is a choice. Or we can also start pointing at different things that divide us and allow the other person to speak. I started something at the university a couple of years ago. It's called Difficult Conversations. And every semester, I gather 10 students. And the goal of these students is you have to have really differing views. Let's say for a classic differing view, like you said, Alessandra, would be the Israel-Palestine conflict. It's not hard at the university to get people with differing views. And we would spend 2 hours together. And the idea was to have difficult conversations. And all that was asked of you is a very simple thing. That when you speak, everyone else listens. And when the other person speaks, you listen. That's it. Nobody wants you to agree. Nobody wants you to say that you're right, just to listen. It was an exercise in listening. And I can tell you now 3 or 4 semesters of doing this. It's an unbelievable thing when you have students who are extremely, extremely pro-Palestine. They could even be with their families from Palestine. And students who are extremely, extremely pro-Israel with their families from Israel in a room listening to each other. Nobody said that you're going to change anyone's mind. But the fact that we can both be in a room, there's 2 things that happen in that process. And it's obvious to us. Maybe not as obvious to students, to younger people, but it's obvious to us. The 2 things that happen is, number 1 is you legitimize the person's existence, which may be which is the first step in any conflict resolution. If you don't believe that I exist, and if I'm not a human being and just an animal to you, then we can never have a conversation. And the second thing is, you may hear a perspective that you never had the ability to listen to because you were so focused on your own perspective. In my opinion, that is the entire point of the university experience. That was the point of going to university, so that you can be exposed to lots of different perspectives. I'm not sure where we went wrong over the years, and I'm not here to fix the university issue or the education issue. But I think that so often, and especially in our society, we don't have the time to be able to listen to another person's perspective. You're a human being. God created you. You have a soul. It's a beautiful soul. The same way your soul is beautiful, every other human being on this planet has a beautiful soul. Oh, maybe some people do things that are not beautiful. That's their actions, not their soul. Every essence of every individual is beautiful. And if we can start off with that perspective, that your essence is beautiful, I may not necessarily agree with what you say, but I agree with you as a human being and your ability to say what has to be said, in your opinion. And so what we're doing is, see, so often I think of the ocean. We spend so much time in the rocky waters on top, and we spend so little time on the still waters beneath. Why don't we spend a lot more time on the still waters beneath? First of all, they're so much more beautiful. If you've ever been to the coral reef, you know that on the top, all you see is waves. And on the bottom, you see an entire ecosystem of beauty, of color like you've never seen before. Somehow our society just became so shallow to the point where all we do is spend our time on the waves. I mean, it's nice for surfing, but you're gonna get hit and you're gonna fall off the surfboard on, and off again. The shallows beneath, the shallow waters beneath, you're never gonna fall off the surfboard. It's quiet. It's a place that you can listen. It's a place that you can connect. And you know what? Maybe by listening to someone else, you can listen to yourself. Susie, does that answer the question?
Mhm, mhm.
I wanted to share something around that idea of having 2 opposite thoughts that are both valid. I have a daughter who has mental health issues, and as she was a youngster, the comment that I often got was, she's just trying to get attention, you know? And as we try to work through why she behaving the way she's behaving, one day my daughter actually said to me, but I do need attention. Don't you hear the fact that I'm in pain? And it changes the way you think about it, like in the sense that, you know, you think, oh, somebody wants attention and they're misbehaving. Whereas what she was saying to me was like, I'm not misbehaving. I'm trying to get your attention so that you can hear my pain. And that's like, it kind of stops you in your tracks to kind of see the other person as a, and now I see, like, you know, any situation with any other human beings who behave or think opposite to the way I think, or differently than the way I think, to kind of acknowledge the fact that they come from their own reality, you know, whatever it is, they come from their own reality. And it's not for me to judge, you know, like, you don't know everybody's baggage and all these kind of things. And I think, like, my daughter really kind of like pointed the finger at it and said, you know, saying to somebody, you know, you just want attention and that's why you're behaving this way, is actually very dismissive and very dismissive of their reality or whatever it is. And there's like lots of kids out there who get told that all the time, but sometimes the way they behave is actually like a sign that they're trying to get a message over to you. And we don't often listen because we're on the surface kind of going through our lives, running around and doing all the stuff that we do. And sometimes we just need to stop and kind of get into the, like you say, the still waters and look at the beauty that's underneath there. And yeah, in this case, it was like a lot of pain, but actually what it did was it resolved our relationship, where instead of kind of staying on the surface, I can actually delve into the pain with her, you know? So it's kind of that kind of what you call, you know, like holding two opposite thoughts. You know, what I learned as a term was this dialectical reality, which is exactly that, as holding two opposite thoughts and they're both valid. No, and so you learn to kind of like hold and push and hold and push, walk the tightrope.
Mm. Changing your perspective changes your reality and changes maybe the reality for others, like your daughter.
Yeah.
That's my takeaway.
Yeah. Some people are just so stuck that they're right, that they don't change, they can't change their minds. That's, you know, I try to not be that way, but it is also a reality.
And that's okay. I don't think the goal of having a conversation, a dialogue, or an argument is to change someone's mind. It's just to be heard. I think that if you walk into an argument or a dialogue and you just allow the other to be heard, that's all it is. We could all leave the same that we came in, that's fine. But we won't leave the same because we had the ability to humble ourselves, to humble our ego for 2 seconds and listen to someone else.
Yeah, another thing that I heard along the way was, do you want to be right or do you want to have the relationship? No.
Well, in Hebrew, we say, do you want to be right or do you want to be smart?
Mm.
You know, don't be right, be smart. Sometimes you have to make choices to where, you know, you just need to make it happen. You don't need to be right.
Exactly that.
It's so easy to say and so hard to do. It's not so hard to say, but it's harder to do because we get confronted with these issues, and especially when it comes to family, there's so many emotions involved.
One of the, my daughter's an adult now, but at the time, one of the things was, is it important for her to go to high school or is it important for her to be alive?
Mm.
It's like, where are you going to put your eternal energies? You know, those kind of things. So it's like, do you want to be right in the sense of like what society expects you to do, what you think is the right thing, what your kind of road would be, what, you know, or do you want the relationship? And so you want your kid to survive this time in their lives, you know?
Yeah.
You know what my great grandmother used to say, and I just know that from my dad. Apparently, they told him many times. It's better to have a healthy donkey than a dead doctor as a son. You know?
Oh,
He grew up with the sentence, it's better to have a stupid donkey than a dead dog. You have to pick your
pick your battles. Yeah, that's exactly. Pick your battles.
This reminds me too of, by the way, Perla, thank you for sharing. I've, as a parent, I can, and actually as a daughter too, I've been on both sides of that coin and I really relate. So thank you for sharing that. I also wanted to just mention that I think this is, in my experience, really important in a marriage too. This, because sometimes examples aren't always, I've actually learned this from Rabbi Bernath, that it's not always super extreme. Sometimes it's just getting through the day with your spouse, right? And you're never, at least I have yet to meet a couple where there's always agreement about every step you take in life. And so many times in my experience with my marriage, that's a question. Well, what's more important now, me being right or me being in a healthy marriage? And so thank you for sharing. That reminded me of that.
Well, it reminded me of my divorce because obviously my ex and I have very different truths.
And it always that way.
But we still have parents. But you see, rejoining the conversation, once the joke has been laughed at, I mean, we still have to co-parent. So whereas our realities are very, very different, we still have to find a common grounds for those kids.
Yeah. I love to hear the takeaways today. I definitely it was really good to be reminded of some of these things. Alessandra, do you want to start with what's your nugget? What are you taking out of this morning?
To use my ego as a clever drive. It makes any sense. Sometimes I find that my ego sometimes is more the one that brings me down, not because I have to be the best or whatever, but it's just because, what wakes you up at night is not what you've done, it's what you haven't done. So to use that ego more as a drive, as drag me down. That would be my takeaway.
You want to pass it on?
Sure, I'll pass it on to Jill.
Thank you. So I love the analogy, and you've used it often, and I've heard it other places of, we tend to be on the surface in the waves and the rocks. And even though I know that down below there's this serenity, this calmness, there's this bizarre comfort in this, being in the rocks and the waves, like I've just gotten very used to it. I certainly know I've had experienced that. And so to just, I don't know if it's just be brave enough or humble enough to know that, yeah, down below there is that place of peace. So I think just keeping that in mind is what I'm taking away from today. I'll pass it to Jen. Good morning.
Good morning. I love the idea of turning the evil inclination on its head, and what you said about how it's actually very good. I really like that concept. I will pass to Celeste.
Thank you, Jen. I have so many things going through my head and my soul. It's hard to even think of one. So the thing I think that struck me the most was Perla, your share about what you went through with your daughter. And I reflected and related to that story, and I appreciated hearing your perspective and the way you told you shared your experience. Alana.
What popped into my head is about holding two truths at the same time and being able to listen. I think it's a very difficult skill, actually, one that doesn't come always easily. And I'm going to share something that my husband always says, and I think a little bit of humor is often a good tool. So he would say, I could agree with you, but then we'd both be wrong. Which is, very true, but it actually means that you've heard the other person in a way, You've heard them, you don't have to agree. Anyway, I'll pass it to Susie.
So I'd like to, Rabbi Bernath, your reminder that when we're in conversations, sometimes we should just be there to just listen. And I need to remember that. And I've heard it before, and I need to be reminded of this regularly, that we have two sides. We have our egos, and then we have our other parts, and decisions need to be made less with ego and more about what, taking the entire situation into consideration. And it's like I need to be reminded of that often. Okay. Who has not yet gone? Cheryl?
Thank you. Sorry for being late. I couldn't log on. There were two things. Again, I like the reminder of the rocky waves. I had a very rocky week, and this is my deep sea. This is my just zone, shall I say, for peace, being with you all and listening. And I was very struck by the class that you gave, Rabbi, with the students, and particularly if you were talking about the Israel-Palestinian conflict, that's a pretty tough one to absorb. But the fact that your main rule was you can't talk when someone else is talking, and so there wasn't a debate. It was really truly a listening skill. And I think we could all take something from that, because oftentimes, I know I do this, I'm sure sometimes we all do this. We listen to somebody, we hear sort of that they're talking, but we're thinking of the next thing to say, as opposed to really hearing what is behind their message. And I'm sure your class probably changed that dynamic for your students. So I was just thinking about that. And Perla, thank you for sharing your story as well. Fahmi, I think you were the last one.
Thank you. So now there is a series of videos by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs called 10 Paths of Gods. And one of them is Kiddush Hashem. That's mean if you want to, we can have multiple truths, but there is only one true truth, which is like the God's way. So if we want to change people's behavior, we have to have a perfect conduct ourselves. So and Judaism never tries to convert other people to Judaism. It never tries that. So this is exactly it. If you are talking to someone, never try to change his mind. I mean, just express your view, have a perfect conduct, and by the time people will follow you. This is how this is how I see it.
We have Perla and we have Kelsey still.
Thank you, Kelsey.
Thank you. I hope you guys can hear me okay. My internet is a little bit unstable right now, but it's kind of a combination of things that we're in a constant state of becoming and just refining myself to consciously stay below the waves. Okay. So thank you. It was a great class of reminders, and Perla.
I really like Jill's comment about the rough waters and the soft waters, the still waters, and that analogy, Rabbi, because I think they're both beautiful. The rough waters have their own beauty and the still waters have their own beauty, but we have to be able to be in rough waters and enjoy that, and then also holy and still waters and enjoy that, and find, for me anyways, it's like to find beauty on a truth. Basically, that's what I would say.
Thank you. I can't, as I'm listening, I'm thinking about how this group is such a great, everyone is so present. Everyone is so good at listening. And so, that's really a takeaway, is that I learned from you, it's very hard sometimes to just sit back and listen, and even sometimes in the takeaways, in these little nuggets, you think, oh, well, I have to listen through each and every one of us. But then it's amazing to see how each person here just not only listens, but then will sometimes say, well, my takeaway is not from what the rabbi prepared, but from somebody's takeaway. Takeaway can be someone else's takeaway or someone else's reflection, and that's the power of listening. That's how beautiful the power of listening is. In any case, this is really amazing. Happy to be together this morning. For those of you who are staying for Talmud, we'll start in a minute. And for those of you who need to sign off, we will see you. Some of you I'll see tonight, and some of you I'll see Monday, and some of you next week.
Okay, thank you.
Bye. Have a good day.
Don, what's Monday?
Thank you.
Sunday.
Monday night is Hebrew letters.
No, she's saying Sunday.
No, Sunday, I know I'm there. But Monday, didn't we finish
No,
Monday?
we're doing the second half of Hay.
Hey, right.
We're doing the second half of Hay this week.
Sorry, almost it. Since we didn't have it because of Shavuot, I moved on.
I'm going to send out a reminder. Don't worry.
Please, okay.
And
Well, did you get Naomi's pictures?
I think so. Yes. Yes. Okay.
Have
Can I
fun.
stay for your Talmud class
Of
or
course.
part of it?
Why not?
Thank you.
Of course. Let me just.
I don't know. I've never done it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Of course.